The night I walked into Torval Wren's big tent, I wore a plain wool cloak and no crown. My steward had argued with me for the better part of an afternoon. A king did not attend the touring circuit incognito. A king sent investigators. A king received reports. My steward was a careful man who had served my father before me, and he was not wrong about any of it, but I had been reading reports about the Vareth circuit for 3 seasons, and none of them had told me anything I could act on. Complaints arrived vague and unsigned. Performers who left the circuit did not stay in Vareth long enough to be questioned. The animals moved through the kingdom's law in a category that made enforcement slow and procedurally complicated, and my council had spent the better part of 2 sessions debating what, exactly, constituted cruel treatment under existing pack statute versus traditional performance custom. I had listened to all of it, and then I had put on a wool cloak and told my steward I was going riding. I was not going riding. The circuit was pitched at the eastern edge of the city, in the old livestock grounds where the autumn fairs had been held for 3 generations before the fairs moved north. Even from the road the pavilion was impressive, a great round tent in deep red and gold, rope lights strung from every guyline, banners snapping in the evening wind with the Wren family seal, a stylized condor spreading its wings. I could hear music already, a hurrying brass sound that made the blood move faster than it wanted to. That was deliberate. I understood the technique. You filled the air with urgency, so that the crowd arrived already keyed to a pitch of excitement, already primed to love what they were about to see before they had seen anything. I paid my coin at the outer gate and went inside. The pavilion held perhaps 400 people. Most were standing at the outer ring, drinks in hand, watching the warm-up performances along the side aisles, a fire act, a woman in a silver costume spinning on a rope 20 feet in the air, 2 wolves in embroidered harnesses running a pattern on a low platform while a handler directed them with a thin rod. The main floor was sawdust and soft light. The smell was hay and animals and something sweet and burnt, roasted nuts from a cart near the entrance. The gilt curtains at the far end of the tent were drawn, hiding whatever came next. The crowd was cheerful. I moved through them without difficulty. A wool cloak in a crowd of 200 ordinary people is excellent camouflage, provided you do not carry yourself like a king, and I had spent that afternoon practicing the specific looseness of a man with nowhere particular to be. I had come because of a name in the most recent complaint file. The complainant had given only a first name, written in a hand that suggested either haste or fear or both, Sable. The complaint was 2 sentences. There are wolves in the Wren circuit who cannot leave. There is a girl there who will not say she is unhappy, but she has the eyes of someone who has stopped expecting things to be different. That was all. No address. The parchment smelled faintly of animal and the particular dry dust of sawdust. I had read it 3 times and then put on the wool cloak. I found a position at the inner rail, 3 rows from the main floor where I could see the gilt curtains and the central performance space. The brass music shifted, a held note, then silence, and the curtains swept back. The crowd cheered. Torval Wren walked out into the light. I had seen him once before, at a merchant's assembly 2 years ago, the kind of gathering where every man in the room wants to be the most important person present, and they all smile too widely. Wren was perhaps 50, broad through the chest, with a shaved head and a coat that had been expensive when it was new, and was now expensive in a slightly labored way. The way things are expensive when the money that bought them is beginning to work harder than it used to. He had a performer's voice. It filled the tent without effort, and he moved like a man who had been told his entire life that a room's attention was his by right. He welcomed the crowd. He made them laugh. He described what they were about to see in terms that made it sound inevitable and rare, a confluence of gifts that happened only because of his particular genius for finding them. The crowd ate it cheerfully. I watched his hands while he spoke, because I have found that a man's hands tell you more than his voice, and his hands, below the cuffs of his expensive coat, were never still. They moved in small, continuous adjustments, touching his lapels, smoothing his sleeves, the constant minor maintenance of a man who is aware at every moment of being observed and cannot rest in it. The first act was genuinely good. A wolf, a large silver male clearly trained over years, ran a series of patterns that required real communication between him and his handler, a young woman in a blue costume who moved with him as though they had been speaking a private language since before either of them could remember. I watched carefully. The wolf's tail was up. His ears were easy. He was working, not enduring. Whatever was or was not wrong in this circuit, that particular relationship was clean. The second act was the rope spinner I had seen in the side aisle, now on the main floor with greater height and a crowd to receive her. She was extraordinary. The crowd knew it and they gave it back to her, and she received their applause with the particular dignity of someone who has earned something real and knows exactly what it cost. The third act was what I had come to see, or so I told myself, reviewing the complaints. The animal act, the one that drew the most oblique references in the unsigned letters. Wren stepped back into the light to announce it with elaborate ceremony. He described the trained wolves of the Northern Drift, a pack of 8, the finest pack performance act in the kingdom. He described their intelligence, their obedience, their willingness. He used the word willingness twice, which was 2 times more than a man who had nothing to hide would think to say. The curtains parted again. 7 adult wolves came out in formation, and behind them, on a short lead held by a cage hand, a wolf pup. The pup was perhaps 4 months old. He was the gray of old smoke, with ears that had not yet decided whether they meant to stand up or fold, and paws that were visibly too large for the rest of him, the kind of paws that meant he would be enormous someday. He moved with the particular combination of wariness and curiosity that pups have, his nose going constantly, reading the crowd, reading the smell of the tent, reading everything. And when the cage hand brought him to the small platform at the center of the floor and unclipped the lead, the pup sat down and looked out at 400 people, and made, in the complete silence, a very small sound that was not quite a whimper and not quite a growl, but was somewhere between the two. The crowd made the soft sound that crowds make at a young animal, a warm, involuntary yielding. Wren described the pup as the circuit's newest and most promising act. He described what the pup was going to do, a simple routine, 3 marked positions on the platform, a final bow, and he turned to the cage hand with the particular expectant expression of a man accustomed to cues being hit. The pup did not move to the first position. The pup sat down more firmly, if anything. His paws were set apart in that way young wolves have of anchoring themselves when they have decided that where they are is where they intend to stay. A ripple of laughter from the crowd, warm, not unkind, the kind of laughter a pup earns just by existing. Wren's expression did not change, but his hands moved, that same small adjusting movement, and then something else, a barely perceptible signal to the cage hand. And then, from the side of the tent, from beyond the gilt curtains, from the place the crowd did not look because the crowd was looking at the pup, a woman walked out onto the floor. She was not wearing a performance costume. She was wearing what I can only describe as working clothes, a dark shirt, close-fitting trousers, soft boots, the kind of outfit that is designed to move in and not to be seen in. Her hair was dark and pulled back simply. She was perhaps 25. She walked the way people walk when they are very good at being unobtrusive, the walk of someone who has learned to take up exactly the amount of space they need and no more. She stopped beside the pup's platform. She did not look at Wren, and she did not look at the crowd. She looked at the pup. The pup looked back at her. His ears shifted, the first time they had moved since he sat down, and then, in a motion that looked less like a trained behavior and more like a decision, he stood up and moved to the first marked position on the platform. The crowd made the warm sound again, louder. Wren's expression reopened into pleasure, the man in the room whose room it is. He spoke to the crowd. He gestured at the pup. He did not mention the woman. She guided the pup through the 3 positions without touching him, with nothing but the quality of her attention and something in her posture that I could not precisely name from where I stood, but that the pup understood completely. At the 3rd position, the pup sat down and put his large gray paws flat on the platform and looked at her, and she gave him a small nod, and he dipped his head, not quite a bow, but close enough that the crowd received it as one and erupted. The noise was enormous. The pup startled and pressed against her leg, and her hand came down on his back, not a trained gesture, just a reflexive one, the hand of someone who has done this 1,000 times, the automatic reassurance, and the pup stilled. That was the first time I noticed her eyes. I was 40 feet away. The lighting was warm and directional, and not particularly kind to subtlety, the kind of lighting designed to make everything look grand. And yet, even from 40 feet, I could see what the person who had written that complaint had described. Not sadness, not anger, not the crushed look of someone actively suffering. Something quieter. The eyes of someone who had been somewhere for a long time and had learned to expect the parameters of that somewhere, and had stopped, in some small and careful way, imagining anything outside of them. I watched her lead the pup off the platform and back toward the curtain, the pup walking beside her leg as though he had decided she was north and he was the compass. Ren was already talking again. The act continued, the 7 adult wolves, their handler, the patterns that the silver male had made look easy and that were in fact extraordinarily difficult. I watched. But my eyes kept going to the edge of the gilt curtain where she had disappeared, the place in the tent that the audience was not looking. Then, approximately 20 minutes later, Ren announced a second segment of the pup's performance. The cage hand brought the pup out again. This time the pup sat down on the main floor rather than on the platform, which was not where he was supposed to be, and put his nose to the sawdust, and began investigating a particular spot with the focused seriousness of a 4-month-old wolf who has found something interesting and will not be redirected until he has finished being interested in it. The crowd laughed again, that same warm sound, pure delight at the animal being entirely himself. Ren did not laugh, his hands moved. He spoke to the cage hand in a voice too low to carry to the crowd, and I saw the cage hand flinch slightly, a small involuntary tightening of the shoulders that the crowd, watching the pup, did not notice. The cage hand crouched beside the pup and took his collar. The pup went with him, still looking at the floor, nose still active. They brought him to the platform. The pup sat and looked at the audience and made the same small sound as before. Nothing in the act happened the way it was supposed to happen. The crowd was still warm about it. They were enjoying the pup's refusal to cooperate. They read it as charming. Ren read it differently. I could see that from his stillness, which was no longer the easy stillness of a man in command of his room, but a tighter thing, a controlled thing, a man holding something in while 400 people watched. He made a signal. Not to the cage hand this time, to someone in the wings. And then I understood what kind of signal it was, because I have governed men, and I know what the signal that means make this happen, by whatever means necessary looks like when it is made without words. I was already watching the gap in the curtains. She came through at speed, not running, but the walk of someone who has been summoned by a signal they recognized and know what it precedes. She came to the platform. She looked at the pup. She did not look at Ren. Ren spoke to her, too low for the crowd, too low for me from 40 feet. Whatever he said, her shoulders did not move. Her chin lifted slightly, the smallest degree. She turned back to the pup and crouched to his level, and the pup immediately walked into her hands, pressing his forehead against her chest, and she held him for a moment, not long, just a moment, and then guided him back to the first position on the platform. The pup cooperated. For approximately 30 seconds, everything was fine. Then the pup stepped off the platform entirely and sat down on the floor beside her feet and refused, in the polite but absolute way of young wolves, to do anything else. Ren stepped forward. The crowd didn't see it. The crowd was watching the pup. They saw Ren step forward as a performer adjusting his position, which is a thing performers do. I saw what it actually was. He raised his hand, not raised it to gesture, raised it the way you raise a hand when you have decided that you are going to resolve a problem through the application of pain. The motion was efficient and entirely practiced, the motion of a man who has done this specific thing many times before and does not think about it anymore. She stepped in front of the pup. The blow caught her across the shoulder and the upper arm. She took a single step sideways under it, the way a person who has taken blows before learns to move, not to fall, not to let the impact send them down, but to manage the direction of the force so that they stay standing. She stayed standing. The crowd, what had the crowd seen? Most of them had seen a performer stumble, a woman adjusting her position. Some of them had seen something wrong and were not sure what it was. I heard the murmur, that shift in sound that a crowd makes when something has happened that they cannot categorize. Ren said something to her. The same low voice. His expression for the crowd was still the expression of a man managing an act, but his eyes were cold in a way that the candlelight and the rope lights and the red and gold of the tent were not sufficient to hide. She looked at him. She did not look afraid. She looked the way someone looks when they have been where they are for a long time and have learned something on the other side of fear, something harder and quieter, the thing you find when you have decided that what happens to your body is less important than what happens to the thing you are protecting. She turned back to the pup. She guided him through the second and third positions on the platform, the pup following her with full attention now, the earlier refusal apparently resolved not by the blow but by her. The crowd received the pup's bow with the same warmth as before. Ren gestured. The crowd applauded. I had not moved from the rail. My wolf, the part of me that is older than my name, older than the crown, older than the law I have spent 12 years making fairer and cleaner, was not howling, was not surging, was doing something much quieter than that, which I had not experienced before and which I recognized, in the way you recognize a thing you have been told about your whole life and never believed would actually arrive, as something that was not going to be argued with. She was walking the pup back toward the curtain when Ren stepped forward again. The second time he raised his hand it was for the same reason as the first, insufficient spectacle. I understood that now. The pup had not performed the full routine. The routine was not complete, and in Ren's accounting that meant the person responsible for the routine had failed. But the second time I was already moving. She stepped in front of the pup again. I was through the rail and across the floor before I had finished deciding to be there. The blow didn't land. I was between them. I was wearing a wool cloak and I was standing between the ringmaster of the Varith circuit and the woman who had been struck once already, and my hand was on his wrist. I did not grip it hard. I have found in 12 years of governing that you do not need to grip hard when everyone in the room understands what you are, even in a wool cloak, even without the crown. The tent had gone very quiet. 400 people and nothing. Ren stared at me. I watched him work through it, the man in the wool cloak who had come out of the crowd, the grip on his wrist, the quality of the stillness, the way the cage hands at the edge of the tent had all taken a step backward without being told to. I watched him arrive at where he was. Alpha King, he said. His voice was very controlled. Ren, I said. I let go of his wrist and turned away from him. Which is the thing you do when you want to make absolutely clear to everyone present who is in command of the room, and I looked at her. She was still standing in front of the pup. Her hand was on the pup's back. Her shoulder, where the first blow had landed, was held slightly wrong, not dramatically, not in a way the crowd would have clocked, but in a way that meant something hurt and she was managing it. She looked up at me. Her eyes this close were not the eyes the complaint had described. Or rather they were, and they were also something else. They were the eyes of a woman who had made a great many decisions about what she was willing to endure and what she was not, and who had just spent 20 minutes making those decisions in front of 400 people, while a ringmaster made different calculations, and who was looking at me now with an expression that was not gratitude and not fear, but something I can only describe as a kind of careful assessment. She was deciding what I was. She was not going to stop assessing me just because I had stepped between her and a blow. She was going to wait and see what I did next. I took the wool cloak from my shoulders and put it around hers. It was warm and it was heavy, and it settled over the shoulder she was holding wrong, and I watched something happen in her expression that she had not meant to let happen. A brief, involuntary softening, a flicker of something behind the careful assessment, the kind of involuntary response that happens when a person who has been cold for a very long time feels warmth and cannot immediately manage their reaction to it. She looked at the cloak on her shoulders. She looked back at me. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was even and direct, the voice of a woman who does not perform gratitude, who has learned to say exactly what she means and nothing more. "What is your name?" I said. "Sable," she said. I turned to look at Torval Wren. "Wren," I said, "what are the terms of this woman's contract?" His hands were doing the thing they did, the adjusting, the maintenance. "A standard performance agreement," he said. 7-year term, renewable at the circuit's option. She came to us from the "Pull the document," I said, "now." There was a pause that was not long but felt long. Then Wren nodded to someone in the wings. I waited. Sable did not move from beside the pup. The pup had pressed against her leg again, and she had her hand on his back, and neither of them was going anywhere. 400 people in the tent were doing the thing that crowds do when something large and uncertain is happening, and they cannot decide whether to leave or stay. They stayed. They were very quiet. One of the cage hands brought a contract folder from the back of the tent. It was a thick folder, the kind of folder that has been added to over time. I took it and opened it. I have been reading contracts since I was 15 years old. My father sat me down with the kingdom's founding land agreements the summer before I took the oath, and I have read 10,000 documents since then. I can read a contract the way a healer reads a body, quickly, and without being misled by what is on the surface. The contract was 7 years. The renewal clause was at the circuit's option, not hers, with no ceiling on the number of renewals. The debt clause, the original debt her pack had carried when she came to the circuit at 18, was structured in a way that ensured it could never fully be repaid, because a percentage of her performance earnings went directly to servicing the debt's interest, and the interest was set at a rate that outpaced the earnings schedule. The contract had been renewed twice already. She was 26. She had been in this tent, by my calculation, for 8 years. I closed the folder. "This contract," I said, "is voided under the Vareth Bonded Service Act, 4th Revision, Section 11, a contract that prevents repayment of the originating debt through its own interest structure is not a valid performance agreement. It is indefinite indenture, which has been unlawful in this kingdom for 30 years. Wren said nothing. "The circuit's operating license," I said, "is suspended pending review by the Vareth Commerce Authority. The review will include the terms of every current performer's agreement, the treatment of the animals in your care, and the incident this audience witnessed this evening." I looked at the crowd, all of whom are witnesses. The crowd made a sound, 400 people at once, a sound that is somewhere between relief and the particular satisfaction of watching something happen that they had not known they needed to see. I turned back to Sable. She had been watching me read the contract. She had been watching me the way she had watched the pup, with the full quality of her attention, measuring, not performing attention but actually giving it. When I looked at her, she did not look away. You are free of the contract, I said. Effective as of this moment. Your debt, the original debt, I will review separately, but its legitimacy under the terms of the fourth revision is doubtful. You will not be required to return to this tent. She looked at me for a long moment. The pup, she said. It was not a question, and it was not a request. It was the kind of sentence that is simply a fact made audible, the way you name the most important thing in a room when everyone else has been talking around it. He is not the circuit's property, I said. I did not know this with certainty, but I was going to make it certain. He came into Ren's possession how? Purchased, Ren said. The word was very controlled. From whom, I said. Ren told me. A name. A pack in the Northern Territory whose wolves had been underselling pups for 3 seasons, which was itself a thing I was going to have to examine with great care, because a pack selling pups is a pack that is in some form of distress, but that was a problem for the morning. I will compensate the purchase price, I said. The pup goes with her. Ren's mouth tightened. That is not, he began. Ren, I said. He stopped. I held the contract folder out to the cage hand who had brought it. Your employer's license is suspended. His assets within this tent are frozen pending review. You and your colleagues are welcome to cooperate with the Commerce Authority tomorrow morning, and you may find that your own situations are considerably less complicated than your employer's. I looked at the cage hands along the walls of the tent. There were perhaps 12 of them, men and women who had worked this circuit, who had their own relationship to Torval Ren's accounting. Go home tonight. Come to the authority in the morning. I looked back at Sable. She was still where she had been standing the entire time, her hand on the pup, the wool cloak around her shoulders. Her expression had changed. Not dramatically. She was not a woman given to dramatic expressions. But the careful assessment had shifted into something else, still watchful, still measuring, but with a quality to it that I could not name exactly, a quality that had something to do with the way the tension in her standing had changed, the small degree to which something that had been braced had allowed itself, very slightly, to ease. The pup beside her was sitting with enormous dignity, his overlarge paws set apart, his ears now fully up. Will you come with me? I said to her. Not an order, a question, the difference matters. My carriage is outside, my physician is at the palace. Your shoulder needs to be looked at. She looked at me, that assessing look longer this time. What happens after the physician? She said. It was the right question. It was exactly the right question. I had known she would ask it, not because I knew her, but because anyone who has spent 8 years in a contract that was designed to be unbreakable would know that the question of what comes next is not something to skip past. After the physician, I said, you rest. Tomorrow, if you choose, you speak with the authority about what you have seen in this tent, and after that, whatever you want. I paused. The kingdom's hostels are safe. There are 3 in this district. If you have family, I will get word to them tonight. If you have no family, there is room in the palace staff quarters, no obligation, no contract, while you decide where you want to be. She was quiet for a moment. I will come, she said. And then, with a precision that I found in that moment, the most clarifying thing I had heard in a very long time. The pup is coming with me. Yes, I said, he is. We walked out of the tent together, the pup padding between us, 400 people parting to let us through. I did not hold her arm. I walked beside her, and the crowd parted for both of us equally, which is the right way for a crowd to part when 2 people are leaving a place together. Outside, the night air was cold and clean after the candle-lit warmth of the tent. The rope lights behind us cast long shadows across the old livestock grounds. The music had stopped. My carriage was waiting at the gate where I had left it. My driver saw me coming and did not react to anything about the situation, because I pay him well specifically to not react to things. At the carriage step she stopped. She put her hand on the frame of the door and stood there for a moment, not going in, the wool cloak still around her shoulders, the pup sitting at her feet. She was looking at the old livestock grounds, at the pavilion with its rope lights and its red and gold banners, at the tent she had lived inside for 8 years. I stood beside her and did not say anything. I have learned in 12 years of governing that there are moments when the most useful thing a person can do is be present without filling the space. She was not fragile. I knew that already, more certainly than I had known almost anything about another person in recent memory. She had taken a blow to the shoulder and stepped in front of a second one, and guided a pup through a performance routine in front of 400 people without a flinch of self-pity or theater. She was the least fragile person I had encountered in a long time. What she needed in this moment was not comfort and not explanation. She needed to look at the things she was leaving, in the way that people look at things they are leaving, whether those things were good or not. Because you look at the places where your life has been, even the hard ones, even the ones you are grateful to be leaving, because they are where your days went, and you do not just turn away from your days. She looked at it for perhaps 30 seconds. Then she picked up the pup and got into the carriage. I followed. The pup settled on the seat between us with the immediate and total confidence of a young animal who has decided that wherever he is correct. He put his nose against the carriage window and then lost interest in the view and put his head on Sable's knee, and she put her hand on the back of his neck and held it there, and the carriage moved. We did not speak for the first several minutes. The city moved past the windows, the nighttime version of it, the lamplit streets and the sound of other carriages and the distant sound of the river. I watched the city I had governed for 12 years the way I always watched it, with a feeling I do not have a clean word for, something between responsibility and love, the feeling of a thing that is yours not because you claimed it, but because you have given your years to it, and it has given its shape to you. "How long have you been Alpha King?" she said. "Not your Majesty, not my lord." Alpha King, the title with no softening around it, asked in a direct voice that wanted a direct answer. 12 years, I said. She nodded. You read that contract very fast. I have read a great many contracts. You found the interest clause immediately. That clause, I said, is the most common mechanism of indefinite indenture in the kingdom. I know what it looks like because I have been trying to close the statutory gap that allows it for the better part of 3 sessions. Tonight's events are going to help with that considerably. She looked at me then, not the assessing look or not only the assessing look, something behind the assessment. You came to the tent to build a case, she said. Yes. And you came yourself instead of sending investigators. The investigators, I said, were not telling me what I needed to know. She was quiet for a moment. The pup, she said. He wasn't going to cooperate with Ren no matter what. He'd have cooperated with me. I'd been working with him for 2 months, but Ren didn't want me in the main act. I was the backstage act. I was what happened when things went wrong. I understand, I said. The first time he hit me, she said, and I felt something in my chest go absolutely still. I was 19. I didn't understand the contract well enough yet. I thought there were laws. She paused. There weren't, not the right ones. There will be, I said. She looked at me. That look again, the careful measurement, and behind it something else that I could now, this close in the lamplight of the moving carriage, name more precisely. A quality of not hope exactly, because hope implies uncertainty, and she was too precise for uncertainty. More like a careful opening. The particular quality of someone who has been very closed for a long time and is permitting, with great deliberateness, a narrow door to be ajar. I thought about what I wanted to say to her. I thought about how to say it in a way that was honest rather than performed. I have spent 12 years in a position that requires a great deal of performance, of authority, of certainty, of the particular gravity that a king is expected to carry, and I am not without skill at it. But I was wearing a wool cloak and sitting across from a woman with a pup asleep on her knee, and what the moment seemed to call for was honesty rather than gravity. "I came to the tent tonight," I said, "because of a complaint I received. 2 sentences, they mentioned your name." She looked at me. "Who sent it?" "I don't know." The parchment was unsigned. It smelled of sawdust. I paused. "Someone wanted you out of that tent." Something moved in her expression, quickly and then gone. "Perla," she said. "One of the row packs. She left the circuit last spring. She said she was going back to her family in the Eastern Territory." She looked at the carriage window. "I didn't know she'd gone to you." "She went to the palace," I said. I don't know if she expected me to read it myself. I paused. She must have known that the formal complaint process was too slow. Sable looked back at me. "How many times did you read it?" I looked at her. 3. Something shifted in her face. Not the careful opening. Something smaller and more involuntary. The kind of thing that happens in a person's face when they are surprised by something they had not expected to affect them, and it does. The pup made a small sound in his sleep and shifted his weight against her knee, and she looked down at him. And for a moment her expression was entirely unguarded. The face of a woman who loves an animal, which is one of the clearest and most unperformable things a face can do. The carriage stopped at the palace gate. The physician was a small, brisk woman named Marit who had been with the palace for 15 years and who was not given to unnecessary questions. She examined Sable's shoulder efficiently and declared the joint strained but not separated and applied a compress and a binding, and told Sable to sleep on her back and to return in the morning. She asked, once, whether there were other injuries, with a directness that made clear she would hear an honest answer without drama. Sable said no. Marit accepted this and finished the binding, and told her the compress should stay on until morning. I waited in the corridor. When Sable came out, she was carrying the pup, who had woken and was investigating the stone wall of the corridor with great seriousness. She stopped when she saw me. "I told you I would arrange quarters," I said. "A room in the east wing has been prepared. There is no obligation of any kind attached to it." She looked at me. The corridor was quiet, it was late, the palace largely at rest, and the lamplight was lower and warmer than the rope lights of the circus tent, and in it she looked different than she had in the tent. Not fragile, never fragile, but present in a way that the tent had not allowed her to be. As if the space of the tent had required her to be compressed, to be the specific and useful thing she was when things went wrong. And here in the corridor, she was expanding slightly back into whatever shape she actually was when nothing was required of her. She looked at me, and then she looked at her wrist. I looked at my wrist. The mark was not dramatic. I want to describe it to you accurately, because I have read what people write about mate marks, and they are frequently dramatic, blazing, burning, a gold light that fills the room. What happened on my wrist in the corridor outside Marit's consulting room was quiet. A warmth first, the kind of warmth that comes when you have been cold for a long time, and then you are inside and there is a fire. Then a deep and settled weight, not heavy, but the weight of something real, the weight of a key fitting a lock, of a word completing a sentence that has been unfinished for years. Then the mark itself, visible now in the lamplight, my Pax mark, the old lines that run in my bloodline, but changed in a way I can see. A second set of lines running alongside mine, completing a shape that I had known was incomplete since I was old enough to understand what a mate mark was. Sable was looking at hers. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "I know what this is," she said. "So do I said. She was quiet. I let her be quiet. I was not going to fill this space either. "I am not," she said slowly and clearly, "going to make a decision about this tonight." "No," I said, "you shouldn't." She looked at me, surprise again, quick, involuntary. "You agree? You have been somewhere for 8 years that made most of your decisions for you," I said. "This one is yours. All of it is yours. The mark is real and I know what it means, but what you do about it is yours to decide. I will not press you." She looked at her wrist again. The mark in the lamplight. Her expression was, I cannot fully describe it. It was the expression of someone holding something very large and very unexpected very carefully, with both hands, not squeezing, not dropping it, just holding it and trying to understand its weight. I will take the room, she said, for tonight. Good, I said. The pup is sleeping in the room with me. Obviously, I said. Something happened at the corner of her mouth. Not a full smile, too early for that, and she was too careful for that, and I am glad she was. But something that in a different light, at a different time, was the beginning of what a smile would eventually be. She went to the east wing. I watched her go, the straight back, the dark hair, the pup looking over her shoulder at me with alert gray smoke eyes, and then I stood in the corridor for a moment with the lamplight on my wrist, and the warmth of the mark settled into me like something I had not known I was cold without. I had ruled this kingdom for 12 years. I had made its laws fairer. I had closed gaps in its statutes and opened its commerce routes and read 10,000 contracts and settled 3 border disputes and lost my father and buried my mother and stood at the center of every difficulty my kingdom had brought me and held. I had done all of it, and I had done it alone, in the particular aloneness of a person who has a great deal of company and no one. I put my hand over the mark on my wrist. I went to my study, and I worked until the first light came through the eastern windows, drafting the revised statute language for the Bonded Service Act that would close the interest clause gap permanently. I worked with more energy than I had brought to a document in 3 years, which is perhaps not how a man is supposed to feel at 2 in the morning after a considerable evening, but which felt entirely accurate. In the morning, I sent for the Commerce Authority. The circuit review took 4 weeks. Wren's license was not reinstated. The review uncovered enough violation of the existing statutes that the authority declined to recommend renewal. The performers' contracts were individually reviewed. 6 of the 12 were found to contain the interest structure violation and were voided. The northern pack that had sold the pup was visited by a welfare representative. They were in debt and struggling with a bad grazing season, which is a problem I could help with through normal agricultural channels and did. Sable gave testimony to the authority on the second day. I read the transcript afterward. It was precise, organized, and entirely without self-pity or embellishment. The account of a woman who had understood for years exactly what had been done to her and had been waiting for a context in which saying it clearly would be useful. She stayed in the East Wing. She did not stay because she was required to. She stayed because I had meant it when I said no obligation, and she had tested that, spending the first week making small moves that I think were, in part, an assessment of whether the absence of obligation was real. She came to meals when she chose to, and did not when she didn't. She walked in the palace grounds in the mornings with the pup, who was learning that enormous marble staircases were thrilling to descend at speed, and who had already made a considerable impression on the palace kitchen staff. She asked for access to the library and used it. She asked to speak with the palace's animal keeper, and they spent 3 afternoons in conversation that I was told, by the animal keeper, with great enthusiasm, was the most useful discussion of working animal welfare he'd had in years. She was careful with me. Not cold, she was not a cold person, but measured. She treated the mark the way she treated everything, with full attention and no performance. She did not pretend it wasn't there. She did not rush toward it. She was deciding in her deliberate way what she wanted and what she thought of me, and she was doing it on her own schedule. I found this, I want to be precise about this, I found this one of the finest things about her. I have spent 12 years governing people, and in 12 years of governing people I have met very few who do what they mean without ornamentation. She did what she meant. When she wanted to speak with me, she came and said so. When she didn't, she didn't. When something interested her, she said it was interesting. When something was difficult, she did not hide that it was difficult, but she did not dramatize it either. She existed at exactly the size she was, no larger and no smaller, and she was not going to reshape herself to fit the expectations of a palace or a king. I found myself rearranging my schedule. Not because she asked, because it turned out that I wanted to be in the room where she was talking, because the quality of her mind was the most interesting thing I had encountered in a considerable time, and because the pup had decided I was also acceptable and would occasionally sit on my feet during meetings, which my counsel found deeply dignified. 6 weeks after the night at the circuit, we sat together in the palace gardens in the late afternoon. The pup, she had named him Sawdust, which I thought was extraordinarily good, was conducting his daily assessment of the garden perimeter and would return periodically to check on us and then leave again, satisfied. "I have been thinking," she said, "about the mark." I waited. "I have been thinking about what I would need," she said, "for it to be a real thing rather than a predetermined thing. I know the bond is real. I don't doubt that. I doubt other things." She looked at me. "I want to know you." "Yes," I said, "that is exactly right." "I have been finding out," she said, "these 6 weeks." She paused. "You read that contract in 4 minutes and you knew immediately what was wrong with it, and then you closed the statutory gap in one night, and you meant it when you said the debt question was doubtful." She looked at her wrist. "You also eat standing up when you think no one is watching, which is an interesting habit for a king." "It is a bad habit," I said. "It suggests you are used to not sitting down," she said, "which suggests something about how you have been living." She looked at me directly. "You have been alone a long time." "Yes," I said. "So have I," she said. We sat in the late afternoon with the garden around us, and the sunlight on the stone, and Sawdust's occasional reports from the perimeter, and neither of us said anything for a while. The mark on my wrist was warm in the way it was always warm now, steady and settled, a warmth that had nothing to prove because it was not going anywhere. "I will stay," she said eventually. "Not I choose you, not yet, not in those words, but I will stay, which is its own kind of choosing, the kind that is made carefully and means more than the dramatic kind. I want to stay. I want to know you better than I know you now, and I want you to know me, and I think that is worth doing." "I think so too," I said. She looked at me with that look that I had learned, the one that was not the closed assessment but the careful opening, the narrow door held deliberately ajar, which had been opening by degrees over 6 weeks in the way that things open when they are safe too. "You should know," she said, "that I will tell you when I think you are wrong." "I would be grateful for that," I said, with complete sincerity. "I told Rin he was wrong," she said. "That is why I had fewer performance slots than the other acts." "You will have more authority here," I said, "than slots." Something happened in her expression that was the full smile this time, the one that had been gathering at the corner of her mouth for 6 weeks. It was brief and real and entirely specific to her, the smile of a woman who does not give smiles out freely, and whose smile, therefore, means something. Sawdust came back from the perimeter and walked between us and dropped something at her feet, a pine cone, which he had apparently decided was significant, and then sat down between us with the tremendous satisfaction of a wolf who has managed his humans correctly and is pleased with the results. She picked up the pine cone and looked at it and then looked at me, and I looked back at her, and the garden was quiet, and the mark on my wrist was warm. I had spent 12 years closing gaps in my kingdom's law. I had governed and decided and read 10,000 documents and held every difficulty my kingdom brought me. I had not, in 12 years, sat in a garden in the late afternoon with a warm wrist and a wolf pup, and a woman who was going to tell me when I was wrong. The gap I had not known I was carrying closed the way the best laws close the worst gaps, quietly, completely, and without any need to be announced.